Coming up, tribal colleges get a boost for clean energy. A documentary short on the life of Ho-Chunk artist Truman Lowe wins a regional Emmy. And we meet one of the makers behind exploring the artistic process of Truman Lowe, a journey through Native American art and education. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines on the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
The ICT Newscast is sponsored by the Indian Land Tenure Foundation, a nonprofit organization serving American Indian nations and people in the recovery and control of their rightful homelands. On the web at iltf.org.
Support for the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez comes from the Arizona PBS studios in Phoenix at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University.
Amidawa Hopa, thank you for joining us. I am Aaliyah Chavez. The National Congress of American Indians is asking a judge to dismiss a lawsuit against it brought on by a group in favor of the R-word mascot previously used by the NFL's Washington Commanders. The lawsuit by the group called the Native American Guardians Association alleges that NCAI conspired with the Washington Commanders to change its former name, which is a dictionary-defined racial slur. The Native American Guardians Association is citing a press release published by NCAI that urged the Commanders to keep their name rather than going back to the R-word. NCAI President Mark Maccaro says the organization's press release was free speech and, quote, far from unlawful. The Native American Rights Fund is representing NCAI in court. Tribal leaders are headed to Washington, D.C. ahead of this week's highly anticipated White House Tribal Nations Summit. But there's a familiar face who will be missing in person. Interior Secretary Deb Haaland tested positive for COVID-19 on Monday. Her office says she is experiencing mild symptoms, is fully vaccinated, and will be isolating following CDC guidelines. She is expected to continue participating in Wednesday and Thursday's White House Tribal Nations Summit, but remotely. Earlier last week, the White House confirmed that President Joe Biden will address tribal leaders in attendance. Well, there will be many issues at the top of mind for tribal leaders in D.C., including for one tribal nation in Oregon. The Coquille Indian Tribe told ICT it is hoping to build a second casino, but critics argue that it goes against the state's one tribe, one casino verbal agreement. One issue with that is that the agreement has not been codified. The other issue is the proposed proximity to other casinos in the area, as well as tribal leaders who say the land is not the ancestral homelands of the Coquille. The proposed location in Medford, Oregon, is over an hour away from any other casino. We turn now to New Mexico, where some lawmakers and advocates say they are against a newly announced council to address the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous people. The advisory council was announced last week by Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham as a means to replace a previous task force, which was quietly ended earlier this year. Officials were able to weigh in during a public comment session at the state's Indian Affairs Committee last week. One non-native state lawmaker criticized the move, saying advisory councils get buried in state government. Another said starting an advisory council is like starting from scratch. The state's Indian Affairs designate, James Mountain, said he will take those messages back to the Lujan Grisham administration. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. The Department of Energy has announced that 2 tribal colleges will get $3 million to invest in solar energy. ICT's Shirley Snavy has more.
Joining us today is Wahala Johns, and she's the director of the Office of Indian Energy Policy and Programs for the U.S. Department of Energy. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I wanted to talk to you about solar energy today. I know that it was announced that you have been investing, the department has been investing in tribal colleges. Could you tell us a little bit about that program?
Two areas that we were wanting to support tribal colleges and universities is the first is for planning grants. So if a TCU is thinking about integrating or even designing clean energy to apply on their campus, that was one area that we could help to support. The second area is also for clean energy technology deployment. So if campuses and TCUs are ready to deploy clean energy on their campuses, that was what also the other we call it topic area that was included in the funding opportunity.
So when you're talking about clean energy, what does that mean? How is that defined?
For our office, what we typically see is solar, wind, battery storage. There are some energy efficiency as well that many of our funding opportunities help to support tribes that are working to really strengthen their power grid reliability. And also, many of the projects we've supported are focused on sort of building stronger energy security in their communities to help weather against climate impacts that many tribes are facing or have faced in the past several years. And so there's many examples that we can point to where tribes are really leading the movement for integrating clean energy into their homes, their tribal buildings, their communities, and their nations. And I think it's just a beautiful way of showing and demonstrating that tribes really are taking the lead in applying these technologies, but also with the values that Native American people have.
I really like the concept of energy sovereignty. I think that's brilliant.
Our office have supported over 200 projects, and majority of those projects are clean energy projects. And many of the tribes, as they are applying the clean energy technology into their nations, they are seeing the benefit of saving funding, cost saving, and then also, again, making their nations much stronger and building capacity of how to do these type of projects, and making sure that they are more energy secure, which is really the kind of area that we want to make sure that I guess encourage that vision. And they say that that is tribal energy sovereignty. These TCUs are going to have to generate curriculum development in the planning phase, but also in the deployment phase, and making sure that there's a learning component and a teaching component that's a part of the deployment of these clean energy technologies. And I do think college campuses, tribal colleges and universities are the models of how we want to be living in our community, right? And these are areas where you have young people coming in that are coming out of high school, and we want to make sure that they're able to learn hands-on about certain technologies. And there's a lot of different measurements that go into, as you are looking at one building or a home, you have to look at how much power you're producing, or not producing, but you're using. And but you also have to design these systems to be able to um, come on so that it can help generate power during the time of heavy usage of power. And so there's a lot to learn. I mean, I think even just at a home level, there's so much to learn about cost savings and making sure you're designing, whether it's solar or wind or battery storage, that it's actually going to help in the long term provide the power for your home, but also for your community. Tribal colleges and universities play an integral role in cultivating Native American leaders with experience, knowledge, and passion to pursue innovative pathways towards a future that is sustainable. While we invest in our young people, I mean, I think we're going to see a lot more clean energy experts, clean energy projects that are going to be aligned with who we are as Native American people. And again, college campuses and these universities are perfect places for us to learn more about how we can build a more just and sustainable world.
Well, thank you, Wahala John. She's the Director of Office of Indian Energy Policy and Programs in the Department of Energy. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Each September, we observe National Preparedness Month to raise awareness about the need to plan for disasters and other emergencies that could happen at any time. As we have seen over the last few years, disasters are increasing in the number and in severity. The threat of climate change means every community must work together to advance a culture of preparedness and build disaster resilience. You have all seen firsthand the impacts of climate change within your tribal nations, pueblos, and Alaska Native villages. FEMA is asking you, tribal leadership, elders, Native youth, and community members across Indian country, to take these steps now to protect your families and yourselves by planning for future disaster events. First, make a family communications plan. Think about who you need to reach if a disaster affects you. Make sure you know everyone's number and the best way to reach them. Second, build an emergency supply kit. Have a supply of food, water, and critical medications, and important documents like birth certificates, insurance documents, and vaccination cards in one place so you can take them with you if you need to evacuate. And third, be informed. Learn about the different types of emergencies that could occur in your area and know where to get vital information during emergencies. Sign up for things like weather alerts, evacuation notices, or other public safety announcements. Also be sure to check with your elected tribal leaders about any emergency plans in place that are specific to your reservation, pueblo, or village. I encourage you all to visit ready.gov/Indian Country for resources, toolkits, and fact sheets that will help you prepare to protect your family.
Truman Lowe was a groundbreaking contemporary Ho-Chunk artist, and his legacy is being remembered in an Emmy award-winning video from Discover, Wisconsin. It is called Exploring the Artistic Process of Truman Lowe, a journey through Native American art and education.
I have an interest in trying to protect as much of the environment as possible. One can choose to be political about it, but I want to create enough interest in water through my work that others will begin to share the same beauty and the same understanding that I have of moving water. It's really about that.
You know, buildings are often named after big money donors, right? La Crosse is taking a very different tack. If a Ho-Chunk student sees Truman T. Lowe's name on the Fine Arts Center at La Crosse, and that's a pretty powerful representation right there. Truman donated, I'm sure, as an alum, but he never gave tons of money. The family didn't give tons of money to the school. It sort of speaks to Truman's legacy. He really influenced thousands of students in general, but he had a very strong impact on Native graduate students as well. He grew up outside of Black River Falls on what's called the Indian Mission. It's a Ho-Chunk community where he was surrounded by extended family and a really close-knit community. Ho-Chunk was his first language, which was not unusual in that community. He grew up with a real understanding of Ho-Chunk culture and heritage. He really kind of entered into being an artist through his experiences at UW-La Crosse, or Wisconsin State as it was called then. He had a lot of great professors there, very involved in their artistic careers. That's where I think he realized that he could become an artist as well. His favorite medium was wood. His father was an excellent basket maker, so he prepared the wood for the baskets that Truman's mother made. He had this deep, deep knowledge of the properties of wood, which I think Truman sort of took on himself as a sculptor. He understood those symbiotic relationships of static versus moving. As he often said, wood is liquid, ultimately.
I want to create enough interest in water through my work that others will begin to share the same beauty and the same understanding that I have of moving water.
He was a bit of a romantic, some say, but there's also a real reverence for his native heritage that is very evident. He would consider himself a minimalist, reducing forms down to their bare essentials. Truman epitomized that in his work. Even though he was working in this fine art tradition, this avant-garde modernist tradition as an artist, he incorporated the traditional arts and crafts of the Ho-Chunk in particular. He was one of the foremost Native American artists of the late 20th century. He really appreciated the opportunity to learn more about himself and the world through higher education. And he wanted others to have that same kind of experience. And so he became a real advocate for Native students getting into higher education.
His life goal was really to promote Native art, to bring Native art out of the past and into the present and have people think about it as a living, breathing, evolving thing. And everything he did were in service of that bigger goal.
He was very much sort of the champion on the UW-Madison campus for all things Native American. The coordinator of the Native American Studies program from 1975 to 1988, and that was really an early period for the Native American Studies program. It had only been started a few years before that. He mentored and helped countless individuals, and I consider myself one of those.
The dedication of this building is incredibly amazing for our family, for his legacy, all the work that he put into promoting Native art and encouraging Native students to go to school.
It was the chancellor's idea, his brainchild. He had recently seen an exhibit of Truman's art. This was shortly after Truman passed away. And he thought that would be a wonderful way to celebrate UW-La Crosse alumni.
And we know that representation matters, and being a Native student coming onto campus and knowing that there's a building named after a Ho-Chunk artist is the university's way of saying, we see you and we believe in you.
La Crosse meant so much to him. He would have a big grin on his face. It couldn't be more beautiful.
You never know where the water is going to travel next as it begins to overflow its banks or begins to move its channel. You never really know what's going to happen. So maybe that's a part of it. Yeah, that's the best way to describe it, really.
One of the creatives behind the scenes in the Truman Lowe film is Casey Brown. ICT's Shirley Snavy has this interview.
And the Emmy goes to exploring the artistic process of Truman Lowe Discover MediaWorks, Inc.
He really kind of entered into being an artist through his experiences at UW-La Crosse, Wisconsin.
Joining us today is Casey Brown. He's one of the people involved in an Emmy-winning program about Truman Lowe. And he's joining us here today. Welcome, Casey.
Oh, Peenagigi, thank you for having me.
Tell us about this documentary project.
So the short film is called Exploring the Artistic Process of Truman Lowe. And Truman Lowe, for those that don't know, he passed away in 2019, but is a Ho-Chunk intellectual, artist, educator, and just has this just wonderful legacy that he just, so much he did for Indian country with contemporary art, both at the Smithsonian as well as in Wisconsin, where he was born. He was born in my hometown of Black River Falls. He's from my tribe, the Ho-Chunk Nation, and certainly was an inspiration for me as a youth. And as I grew up, I found out he was an inspiration to quite a few people. And so the video is sort of just looking at his life just real quickly, very briefly, in a little over 6 minutes. But we try to say as much as we can about such a wonderful individual.
He definitely was. And I had the honor of knowing him through many different aspects of my career. I was just always struck by his insight and his caring nature for young people who are interested in education. Did he have that kind of influence on you?
Certainly. Truman, I mean, I think overall, because I did know Truman, actually, as I grew up, Truman kind of changed with how I knew him. Just because when you're young and you're youth, I was in Black River Falls, and that was my entire world. And outside of that is Lacrosse and Eau Claire, Lacrosse being where Truman eventually went to school. But those were the big cities for me. And things outside of that, even where I live now, Chicago, that was about as fictional as Wonderland. It wasn't a real thing. I'd never seen it. So you'd see it on TV, but you see so much on TV, it doesn't really place in your life and have that sort of it's almost intangible. And I think as I grew older, Truman, I knew of him when I was young, and I just knew of him as some Ho-Chunk guy that made weird art, and which was good for me. I like weird, so I certainly knew him of that. And then it's like, oh, he teaches too, and gradually as I got to know him more and more, and then I went to UW-Madison where he was professor. And so I was president of our American Indian student organization there. So I got to interact with most of all of the faculty, a lot of functions. And I certainly interacted with Truman and, bonded with him because of, shared background. But he certainly had that sort of impact, certainly on me, just knowing that, someone with basically the same background as me went on to, create the contemporary wing of the Smithsonian American Indian art. So that's just astounding. So I think as I got to know him more and more, and as you grow outside of those little bubbles, you begin to see these people that were in this little bubble. They're outside, then they're in those bigger ones. So he was someone that was known worldwide, and just all the stories I've heard, especially as we put together this piece, and it's just the stories of students that he impacted from across the world, and just how they would happen to run into one another and talk about. And that's the thing, you could have lots of professors at the university, but he seemed to have an impact even on folks that just weren't even artists and just took one of his classes.
I understand that they named a building after him. Did you go to that ceremony?
Yes, actually, I'm glad you mentioned that. That was the impetus for when I initially pitched this video. So I was working with the Ho-Chunk Nation, my tribe, as the public relations officer. And one of the relationships that we had was with Discover Wisconsin, and creating these shorter videos with our business department, highlighting the Ho-Chunk Nation. They were kind of open-ended. They were just mostly, PR promotional videos. And when, I had the opportunity, what happened is I was working in my capacity as public relations officer, and Chancellor Gao at UW Lacrosse, he had approached the Ho-Chunk Nation. He had wanted to rename the building, which wasn't named for anyone, so you're not stepping on anyone's toes, after Truman. And he reached out to the nation. That came on my desk, and I immediately said, I will personally make sure that this happens, because just the impact that Truman had on me, and just having known him, and that type of recognition. And I looking into it, this was the first time in the UW system that they were going to be naming anything after a native and an alumni.
So what are you working on now, Casey?
I have a couple projects that are native focused, so I'm moving forward with that. But I still am doing. I'm showing the video a lot, and I'm also a comedian. So I did go to UWL and did I hate the term, but edutainment. It worked, The portmanteau works. I just don't, it doesn't sit well with me, but I went and educated and entertained students there. It's something I've been doing for a while, and getting to show this film. So I have been doing that, as well as going to be getting one of the producers from Discover Wisconsin. We're going to be going to universities and talking about it, because the whole point of the video was really, Truman is someone that should be a name that more folks know.
Well, Casey Brown, Emmy-winning producer, thank you very much for joining us on the ICT Newscast.
Pina Gigi, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Well, ICT invites you to be part of something special. Each week, we're taking on a different topic important to Indigenous people and to you, our viewers and readers. Find the link at ictnews.org to sign up for our e-weekly newsletter, which is emailed on Thursdays. We are covering food, business, economic development, arts and culture, and for December, we're working on a very special holiday edition. And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.